Welcome to Property Developers Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and with me today are a team of experienced property developers who are going to answer your questions on the intricacies of property development. With me today are Mike Frisby. Mike, welcome. You're owner of Galpin Developments.
Hello.
Evan Maindonald, CEO and founder of Melt Homes.
Hi.
Welcome. And Rob Wilkinson, founder and director of Crowd With Us.
Hello there.
Welcome to you all, gents. We're going to discuss today HMOs, and for our viewers that don't know what an HMO, it's a home of multi-occupancy, and it's a way of providing accommodation that's become increasingly popular over the last few years. So, Mike, to you first, do you want to explain exactly what an HMO is and why a developer would be interested in it?
Yeah, so an HMO is shared living. So you take a house and then you rent people rooms within it, and they share certain facilities within the property. And why is that attractive to the person moving in is because it's cheap, affordable accommodation. And the old version of that was very much just a room and fairly basic. But these days, HMOs have taken off into sort of some very high end. You've got a spectrum of them. The advantage for the developer is that they produce some very good income. So as new into property or just starting to get going with your property investment, it provides a steady income. So if you're looking to develop, you've got a supply of income that means that you're not always waiting for that development to sell. And quite often you're going to keep these for the long term. So they're good, sound, long-term investments that provide a decent income.
In terms of investment value, how would you say, is there a set formula for working out the percentage of increase in value from turning, say, a large house into an HMO?
There's certain rules behind it in terms of, obviously, if you convert a house into an HMO, sometimes you can uplift the value as well, so there's a nice development gain within that. But it's really the income, and other investors, trade the value of an HMO off the income it produces. So the more rent you get, the more valuable often the HMO can be.
I see it as a good strategy for somebody who wants to start out in property development, because you can buy a house, you can convert it to an HMO, and in doing so you can increase the value of the property, if you buy the right house that is, but you can also increase the rental yield at the same time. So what you can then do is, once you've finished converting it, you can refinance it. If you get it right, you can take out the money you put into it in the first place, and you can go on and do another one. So it's a good way of building up a string of investment properties which provide you with a good income.
It's also a good way for people to get their foot on the ladder. So when I first got into property, I bought this a few years ago now, but I bought a 3-bedroom house, converted it into a 5-bed and rented out the other rooms, and I lived there for free.
I did exactly the same thing. I bought a house in Hammersmith in London, first house I bought in the UK, rented out 3 rooms, ended up with a net income of £1,000 a month. So I went from paying £500 a month in income to living for free and getting a net income of £1,000 a month after paying my mortgage.
Now, you both mentioned that you lived in these HMOs as well as rented out the rooms. Is there an implication for you living there, or any advantages in terms of, council tax or tax credits?
I think that thing that Rob and I are talking about, they're not really formally HMOs, but they're the same thing in a way. So they're people, and all an HMO is where you have your own bedroom, but you have communal facilities. So I suppose the idea started off with students maybe, or just people who know each other, professionals sharing a house. That is in a way an HMO. You've got a shared kitchen, you've got shared bathrooms, they're not private to you. So in essence, that's what defines an HMO. It's a property where which has communal or shared facilities, shared kitchens or shared bathrooms.
Okay. Now, in terms of regulation, are there regulations standard throughout the country in protecting the tenants?
Unfortunately, this is one of the issues, and what makes HMO investing quite complicated is the fact that each council will have their own rules. Now, there are some standard things across the country as a base, but then there could be local variations. And I think one of the key things that makes HMO investing complex is, every department within the council almost regards has their own rules about HMOs. So there's housing standards with room sizes and communal spaces and sizes of en-suites and all of these things, and fire regulations. And then there's planning, because there's now quite a lot of planning regulations around HMOs, whereas back in the day there was, you could pretty much turn any property into an HMO if you wanted to. And then council tax also take different views. So different departments will say different things around HMOs, and that's one of the reasons why it makes it quite complicated.
So in terms of permissions, what would be the process? First of all, planning?
Yes, so what you can do, so there's different layers for HMOs. So a family house is known as a C3 property. And if you put in 3 to 6 people, that is a C4 class property. That is an HMO, a C4 class. Now, you can do that under permitted development, but a lot of councils have taken that right away. So there's maybe streets, or it might be the whole council area, that they've taken that away, and you have to go through planning permission to get that. If you have a property that's larger than 6, and maybe you have 7, 8, 9 or 10 people sharing, that's a sui generis type property, and that does need its own planning permission for that particular type. So you can't just take a house and put loads of people in it. That would definitely need planning permission.
So there's 2 parameters there, just to make it clear. You might have heard people talk about Article 4 directions. That's what Mike's referring to. So where the council withdraw permitted development rights for HMOs, they use an instrument called an Article 4 direction to do that. And you can check on the council's website where those rights have been withdrawn. But the other parameter is size of HMO. So in order to enjoy those permitted development rights, it has to be in an area where there isn't an Article 4 direction, and it has to be under a certain size, which I think is 6.
Well,
It's
3 to 6, 3 to 6
yeah.
is a C4.
Exactly. Above that, you've got to get permission.
Above that, you've got to get permission, whatever it is. Or you might build, as an investor or developer, you might buy an existing building with existing rights, which you might be extending, doing up.
And I'm also presuming that the creation of, a formal HMO situation is largely to protect tenants, to give them a standard of safety and well-being.
That's right. And something that's happened last year was that they've increased the licensing regulations on it. So basically any property with 5 or more people in it now needs to be licensed. So what they're doing is there's an extra stipulation with the fact that there are sharers. There are extra stipulations around safety and size regulations, and there's certain certificates.
So that would almost replace building regulations then?
Well, you still need building regulations for the building part. If you're doing an extension, you need the building regulations for that. But what it is it's a license to say, yes, this passes all the local council's criteria, safety-wise, size-wise, amenities-wise. So, for example, if you have 6 people in a property, you need more cooking facilities to match that. You need the amount of plug supplies, so all of these little things that they make sure that you're adequately supplied.
But that licence that you refer to, that isn't a planning licence.
No,
that's environmental.
That's the housing
environmental
standards, and that's what I mean. It comes down to the housing standards are really bothered about 5 or more people.
Exactly.
Planning is 3 to 6.
Exactly. You've got multiple different hoops to jump through in different departments, and they might even say different things to one another.
And that was brought in as a result of all the dodgy landlords out there, just cramming as many people as possible.
It's trying to raise the bar on standards, and you see this across the whole of property investment and landlording. There's mooted that even single lets eventually might get to be licensed, but certainly now that was an extra, I think, 177,000 properties that needed to be licensed at the back end of last year.
What's really interesting, and I think this is something that Mike is leading the field in, along with a couple of other big names in the HMO game, people like Rick Gannon or Stuart Scott down in Brighton, and that is really delivering HMOs that are high quality and are targeted at a different demographic. So it's not just cost driven. It's about delivering value for money and delivering a living experience. That sense of community and something that's tailored to a particular segment, maybe not students or people who are trying to save money, but people who want to live somewhere smart. Mike's probably more able to talk about this than I am.
Yeah, I think there's a growing market in terms of developers as well entering into this space, which is, to me, high quality, affordable living.
Yeah.
Living's got so expensive within the country, but people still want standards. So, a lot of our properties we put in en suites. We have high standards. It's decorated nicely. The furnishing's good quality. It's generally a nice place to live. And then some of the communal areas, you might do more within the communal areas. And that moves on to what is a newer movement called co-living, which, you know, is more about the sharing and the environment that you have. And you know, there are some big developments out there creating co-living environments. And that's not a new concept. It's been around for a very long time, especially in other parts of the world. But it's now starting to hit, you know, this country. And certainly where you've got you're restricted on space, it's a great way to live centrally, affordably for the next generation who are used to renting everything. You know, they want easy in, easy out. They want access, they want availability of everything, they want the standards, they want the Netflix, they want, you know, everything. So just having that in one monthly payment is actually quite convenient.
I mean, is this the progression of renting? I mean, for many years, you know, we realised we were a nation who wanted to be property owners. We were always told that in Europe, ownership was really a no-no, and rental activity was a fixed cost. It was actually beneficial. You could apportion a certain amount of your salary to living costs, and you'd have a lot more disposable income. So, are we gradually going down that path?
Well, I believe there's a trend with the younger generation coming through that experience is far more important than consumables and assets and places. So you've got to combine that experience with where people live, and therefore ownership's not so important because they want to be more flexible. Everyone's more geographically mobile than ever before. They want to travel, so they want to come in, and they might be working on a project somewhere. So, you know, to move is very, very expensive if you are owning the whole time. I think maybe one day they want to own, but in the time being, they want to experience and have a good time. And
well, I guess with first-time owners now sort of buying their first property in their late 30s, that first 15-year experience of your own home is going to have to be this way, isn't it?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think what we're seeing is the evolution of living as a service rather than it being just a place to live, like a flat or a house. So these co-living developments that Mike has referred to, so I think the first one was done by The Collective. They did about a 400-bed development in Old Oak, Willesden Green. And they're building one in Stratford at the moment. They've got a couple of other quite big ones. Those developments contain shared communal facilities like cinemas, like games rooms, roof terraces. They also offer services like they'll have a zip car service included, they'll have a laundry service. So actually it's all of the stuff that you need to live. And in fact, it offers a different kind of living experience to the sort of living experience that you would have if you just had your own property. You wouldn't have that interaction with other people. And I think a lot of young people, particularly entrepreneurs, like the ability to meet with like-minded people in pleasant spaces. So you combine community with living in a way that we haven't really done before. And actually what's really interesting is We Live and We Work, which is it's a big US company, has raised billions of dollars on a valuation as a tech company based on this model. We Work are already in the UK and will almost certainly bring in We Live facilities here as well. So it's a market that we're seeing investors get into. And I think we're going to see a big evolution in the market.
And it's a natural segue from being at university, where you're used to sharing and being with your friends, and doing the same when you come to work in the city.
And
Gents, I'm sorry, that's all we've got time for in this half of the programme. Going to have to shut you down there. So join us again shortly after the break. Thank you.
The tax system has evolved significantly over recent years for property investors and developers. You may think that you and your accountant have a grip on these changes. However, unless you're receiving specialist tax advice from a specialist tax advisory firm, then it's unlikely to be the case. At ETC Tax, our team of highly experienced chartered tax advisors work with private individuals and companies to deliver effective tax planning whilst meeting HMRC compliance requirements. Let us help you to meet your personal or commercial objectives in the most tax-efficient manner. ETC Tax, making the complex simple.
By investing in large-scale leveraged property development projects, private equity funds can achieve annual returns in excess of 25%. So how can small-scale investors achieve these kind of returns? Design-led development is the approach we use to increase the end values of the properties we develop and to optimise the profitability of our developments, enabling us to deliver better value for money to our buyers and break the price ceiling in the markets for which we develop. We have developed well-structured due diligence processes that identify risks and quantify associated costs. These processes, alongside our design-led approach, enable us to deliver development projects that minimize risk and maximize return for us and our investors. For more information about design-led development and how you can invest in our property development projects, visit our website melthomes.co.uk.
Welcome back to Property Developers Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and with me are our panel of experienced property developers. So, Mike, first question to you in this second half is this. I've heard that HMOs are risky and are only suitable for experienced developers to undertake. Is this true, or what should I watch out for?
Well, I think it's good to have a little bit of experience of investing, so maybe a buy-to-let, but you can quite quickly move up into the HMO space. Obviously, there's a lot of regulations around HMOs, which is what puts people off and why I think people say they're risky. To me, in some respects, they're less risky because you've got multiple rooms and they're never, you're very unlikely you're all going to be empty. They are a little bit more hard to manage, so you need to either get a good agent or really understand the management yourself if you're going to self-manage. So the good agents are hard to find.
Okay, and I mean, you say managing. Are there specialist agents now that do nothing but HMO management?
There are specialist agents popping up around in different locations. I think born out of large developers who've got a lot of HMOs themselves, then start managing other people's, or people see a niche within the marketplace. I think in the olden days, the traditional high street agents weren't that interested because the standard wasn't good of HMOs. It was always seen as the nasty end of the market, and people still have that perception of HMOs. Whereas, really what I think the leading HMO investors are doing are really trying to, premiumise that.
Can you insure
market.
your rent as you would in perhaps a normal short-hold tenancy?
Obviously you've got an AST with the tenant. And the same sort of rules apply as a normal single let. It's just that he has access to the room and then shares the communal area.
So in essence, the AST is just for the room, isn't it?
The AST is for the room, and then he has access to the other areas. So what is his sole space? It is his room or her room.
It's funny because we have an investment property portfolio of about 50 residential and commercial properties, mostly residential. And we've tried outsourcing that to agents, and we brought it back in-house because I think that's the way that it's best managed. I've never actually converted a property to an HMO. I've owned one for a while, but my concern with HMOs would be that amount of management. I think you'd have to do it in-house. I don't think it would work very well outsourcing it unless you had a really good agent. But I'm interested in sort of how you would see this from a lender's perspective or a crowdfunder's perspective. I mean, have you looked at these sorts of issues when you're looking at crowdfunding stuff on the platform? We
haven't actually funded any HMOs that I'm aware of or that come to mind, but it's certainly something that we consider with we're actually talking to Mike at the minute with an experienced developer.
I mean, what's quite interesting, I mean, Mike, you talked about a lot of regulations. In some ways, those regulations could be very useful in fact in keeping you on the straight and narrow while you're doing the development.
A lot of fellow landlords are saying, "Oh, all this regulations." For me, I like it.
Yeah.
Because then I know I've got someone else who's actually independently said, "Yes, I'm up to the standards. I'm meeting what is the right specifications." Because the last thing I want is any problems with the properties, any safety issues, all of those kind of things. So for me, they're a great thing to be introducing. You've got some extra costs, obviously. But, I'm wanting high standard, high quality, and regulated
So
products.
your initial question was on risk, and I think that leads on that all this licensing and regulation that helps mitigate a lot of the risk.
It can only help, can't it? It can only help.
But also, I think it increases the perception of, or the positive perception of the HMO industry, if we want to call it that, by people by tenants.
Yes.
You know, as quality standards increase, you don't want people to think of HMOs as dodgy squats.
No.
Forgive the phrase, but if quality is increasing and also people are developing products that are more and better suited to the market and for different segments of the market, then I think people's perception of them as an attractive place to live will improve, and that's got to be good for
There are clearly different segments, and people aim at different segments. There's the student segment, there's the high-end professional segment, and then there's the sort of the lower, people on benefits segment. Because if you're young on benefits, you are only entitled to room rates, not to rates that are going to cover flats. So you're left with no choice but to live in shared
But I mean, Mike,
accommodation.
you've had a lot of experience of these HMOs. Evan, I want to come to you because you haven't had so much direct experience. But the question that we have sent in here is, do we think that too many developers are focusing on HMOs, and is that market becoming saturated? So is it something you as a developer would look to moving more into, or are you just looking from above and...
We have thought about doing a sort of a 100 or 150 unit co-living facility on a development that we're currently working on in Kennington in SW9. So I don't think I'd look at smaller HMOs, but that's just because I'm looking at a different size of project. Do I think it's becoming saturated? I can see a lot of people out there doing it, and having looked at what people are talking about on property forums, it does seem to me that in certain parts of the UK there is too much competition, and I suppose in any market where there's too much competition, well, I mean, for tenants, that's a good thing. If there's competition, obviously rents are going to come down and that'll push quality standards up. But as a developer, clearly I want to be in places where there isn't so much competition and I'm getting a better return on my investment. So I think certainly it's true that in certain cities, maybe Cardiff, for example, perhaps like you again, probably have a better feel for this than me, that there's been too much.
There are certain places, where I think there have been probably too many HMOs developed. But for me, it's like any industry. There's a maturity potentially coming within the industry, but you just need to compete better, and you need to. This is where the added value and the added service come in. But also, be wise about it. One of the reasons I invest in an area of Article 4, so that's going to restrict the supply. So in my area, I don't believe we'll ever get to too much saturation because there's a natural planning control over it. So yes, I think a lot of people talk about it. Not so many people do it. And there's a natural movement of old landlords moving out of the market. Those also people who dip their toe in it and don't like it and move out. And I just think you'll get the more professional landlords.
Rob, you're London-based. You're doing your crowdfunding. So do you see, or do you anticipate a bigger move to this sort of development in your field?
I think in London in general, I think it was already touched on earlier on. I mean, whilst there's oversaturation in certain parts of the UK, I think with property prices being as expensive as they are, there's a definite need for it.
We can't get enough, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
I think in cities like London, we're more likely to see the evolution of large-scale co-living projects. And I think maybe a threat to HMOs is the economies of scale that those projects can offer. So it may knock some of the facilities. Then the facilities, exactly, they're more attractive. So it may knock some of the smaller operators out of the market.
Evan, just on a final point on HMOs, and where do you see the market going?
I think the evolution of co-living is really very, very exciting. I think it's a significant shift in the way that we perceive accommodation, and that's why it's seen so much money invested in it. I know there's a lot more money going into it. I think there's a really interesting dynamic that's happening at the moment, which relates to the impact that the internet is having on the high street. The internet has changed the way that we shop, and the high street, as we used to know it, is falling to pieces. I mean, Debenhams, having recently gone into administration, is a good example of this. We're going to end up with a lot of empty, large high street properties, and I think one of the likely uses for those will probably be co-living facilities, some sort of shared living as a service that goes into those kind of buildings.
Now, gents, what I'd like to do now is just finish off really with a sort of broad question. It's about the market. If I could just go to each of you fairly quickly. What do you think the state of the market is at the moment, and where do you think it's going to be if and when we get Brexit?
So, I mean, at the moment, the property market's tough. The volume of sales has gone down. But the model that I do with HMOs and co-living, very much still very buoyant in terms of rental demand is still there. And you can still refinance, and generally the model is to hold for the longer term. So at the moment, the issue, the market is a bit more static, isn't a problem within the market. So I continue to do the HMO developments, co-living developments a couple of years ago, because I thought this might actually happen within the marketplace, that the development market might slow down. So at the moment, that's great. I think, once we get through the Brexit, it'll all pick up because there's this pent demand. I think some landowners who are selling their lands are basically taking
I think it's called the Brexit
too
bounce,
much. Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, and I think also people are unrealistic as to what their developments could be worth. And in the past, developers were overpaying for it, and now they realise that they can't. So we've got to wait for the landowners to come back down, I think.
Okay. Evan?
I had a leaflet come through my door this morning that said, how to take your pet to Europe when Brexit happens. And I thought that should say if Brexit happens. Because there seems to be a certain amount of uncertainty about
I think
whether it's even going to happen or not.
Somebody's certainly getting very good at kicking the can down the road.
Well, true. So I think the event for me will be certainty, whether or not we're Brexiting and on what terms. But I agree with Mike. I think markets hate uncertainty. That's a well understood trend in the stock market. If investors are nervous, they just stay out of the market. And what I believe that we will see is once we get certainty about what will happen with Brexit, we will see a bounce in prices. The one thing that I've seen that's really interesting in the market in the last year, in particular in London, is that sites can be bought at reasonable prices without having to compete with 10 other people for them. So I personally think that current market conditions are a buying opportunity for developers. And I think I'm in buying mode in terms of sites at the moment for that reason.
Okay. Last word to you, Rob.
Yeah, no, I think the guys have covered most of it, but the latter end of last year, people were holding on, waiting for Brexit. They unrealistic expectations of what their properties were worth. They put them on the market. Now we've got to wait until Halloween, potentially. So I think you're going to have those that have held on as long as they could. That there's going to be buying opportunities.
I think there's one good thing that comes out of all of this. There is something called boredom, and after a certain period of time, people just.
There's also life. People have to move, kids.
That I think is what's been driving a lot of the pent-up demand on the market. People eventually have been waiting.
Up.
They've given up. And so actually I've heard of a lot of estate agents say that they've had the best January that they've had that they can remember. So, that seems to be...
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed. That's all we've got time for on Property Developers Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join us next time.
By investing in large-scale leveraged property development projects, private equity funds can achieve annual returns in excess of 25%. So how can small-scale investors achieve these kind of returns? Design-led development is the approach we use to increase the end values of the properties we develop and to optimize the profitability of our developments, enabling us to deliver better value for money to our buyers and break the price ceiling in the markets for which we develop. We have developed well-structured due diligence processes that identify risks and quantify associated costs. These processes, alongside our design-led approach, enable us to deliver development projects that minimize risk and maximize return for us and our investors. For more information about design-led development and how you can invest in our property development projects, visit our website melthomes.co.uk.
Hi, I'm John Howard, and I'm known as the property expert. The reason for this is over the last 40-odd years, I've bought and sold over 3,500 properties, and I'm still going. I'm delighted to pass on my vast experience and knowledge to you through my property seminars that are taking place across the UK this year. To know more, please go to johnhowardpropertyexpert.co.uk.